My name is Dr. Adrian Royce. I'm a renowned cardiothoracic surgeon, born and raised in New York City. Growing up, I always had a fascination with how the human body worked, how the heart beats tirelessly, how the lungs breathe life. That fascination drove me to the heights of medical achievement. People call me brilliant, some even say a prodigy, but I know better. My success isn't luck, it's skill, precision, and relentless hard work. I've dedicated my entire life to science and medicine. To me, faith, spirituality, or whatever people want to call it, is nothing but a crutch, a convenient excuse for what science has yet to explain. When my patients clutch their religious symbols or murmur their prayers before going under the knife, I respect their rituals, but I don't believe in them. Life is biology, a series of mechanical processes. If a heart stops beating, I fix it. Simple. Or so I thought. My days are long and relentless, but I thrive on the pressure. The operating room is my domain. It's a space where my decisions mean the difference between life and death. Here, I am in control. I don't tolerate incompetence or inefficiency, and my team knows it. Dr. Royce doesn't make mistakes, they say, but they don't see the sacrifices behind the mask. Sleep, optional, family, secondary, empathy. Well, I've learned to suppress it. Emotions don't belong in surgery. At the hospital, people see me as confident, even untouchable. But I know I'm not invincible. Beneath the accolades and the reputation lies a man who sometimes questions what it's all for. I've always pushed those questions aside. There's no time for doubt when lives are on the line. Then there's Laura. Laura works as a senior nurse in the ICU, and she's perhaps the only person brave enough to challenge me. Her faith in God and her unwavering compassion for patients often irritate me. She once told me, "Science can heal the body, but only faith can heal the soul." I laughed it off at the time. What does she know? Her job doesn't require the precision mine does. Yet, there's something about her conviction that stays with me, no matter how much I try to dismiss it. For now, I'm content to rely on science. It's what I trust, what I control. But deep down, I wonder if there's something I'm missing, something more. It was a Wednesday, just like any other, when my world started to unravel. I had been scheduled to perform a triple bypass on a middle-aged man with severe coronary artery disease. The procedure was complex, but nothing I hadn't handled before. My patient's family stood outside the OR, their hands clasped together in prayer, tears streaming down their faces. Avoided eye contact. I didn't need their gratitude or their faith. I needed focus. The operation began smoothly. I made the incision, exposing the man's fragile heart. The room was silent except for the rhythmic beeping of monitors and the steady hum of the ventilator. My hands moved with practiced precision, bypassing one clogged artery after another. Everything was under control, until it wasn't. Suddenly, the patient's heart stopped. Code. "Blue!" the anesthesiologist shouted, breaking the silence. Adrenaline surged through my veins as I barked orders. "Defibrillator now! Charge to 200 joules!" The nurse complied, her hands trembling. I took the paddles and delivered the shock. Nothing. The heart remained still. "Charge again!" I growled, my voice tight with urgency. Another shock, and still no response. Sweat dripped down my forehead as the minutes stretched into eternity. I couldn't lose him, not under my watch. But as I worked furiously to revive the patient, something began to happen to me. At first, it was subtle, a tingling in my left arm. I ignored it, focusing on the task at hand. But then the tingling spread, turning into a sharp, radiating pain across my chest. My vision blurred, and the world tilted on its axis. I staggered backward, clutching the surgical table for support. "Dr. Royce," one of the nurses called out, her voice distant and distorted. I tried to answer, but the words wouldn't come. The last thing I saw before collapsing was the patient's open chest, his lifeless heart, frozen in time. The room spun, and everything faded to black. When I awoke, or thought I did, I wasn't in the OR anymore. I stood in a vast, cavernous space filled with intricate, gleaming mechanisms. Massive gears, pulleys, and clockwork systems whirred and clicked. In perfect harmony, stretching endlessly into the void. It was beautiful and overwhelming, a symphony of precision. For a moment, I was captivated. But then the mechanisms began to falter. Gears jammed and snapped, sending shards of metal flying. The harmony turned to chaos. Sparks rained down, and the ground beneath me trembled. Panic set in as I realized I had no control here. I reached out to steady myself, but my hands passed through the machinery as if it wasn't real. A voice echoed through the void, low and resonant, filled with accusation. You pride yourself on fixing what's broken, but can you fix yourself, Adrian Royce? I turned, searching for the source of the voice, but I was alone. Alone in a place where logic was unraveling, and my own arrogance had no power. The voice echoed again, this time sharper, cutting through the cacophony of grinding gear. You've built your life on precision, control, and logic. But what happens when the machine fails? I tried to speak, to argue, but no sound came out. My chest was tight, the air thick as if I were breathing through a dense fog. The ground beneath me shuddered violently, and I stumbled forward. Each step felt like walking through quicksand, pulling me deeper into this surreal mechanical nightmare. Around me, the intricate machinery continued to break apart. Gears ground against one another, their teeth snapping and falling like shattered glass. The once perfect symphony was now a discordant wail. As I moved further into the chaos, I noticed shapes emerging from the shadows, human-like figures, faceless and indistinct, yet hauntingly familiar. One stepped forward, its form flickering like a failing hologram. "Do you remember me, Dr. Royce?" it asked, its voice tinged with pain. "You said I was beyond saving. You didn't even try." A memory surged into my mind, unbidden and vivid. A young woman, early 30s, clutching my hand in desperation as I delivered the news. Her condition was terminal, surgery too risky to attempt. She had begged me to explore other options, but I had dismissed her plea. "I'm sorry," I had said, my tone clinical. "There's nothing more I can do." The figure's voice cracked. "You didn't care about my life, only your record. You didn't want a failure tarnishing your name." I did what I thought was right," I stammered, my voice trembling. "I followed the science." The figure tilted its head. "Did you? Or did you follow your pride?" Before I could respond, more figures emerged, each one carrying a fragment of my past. An elderly man whose surgery I had postponed to attend a conference. A child whose parents I had dismissed as hysterical. Patient after patient, their forms blending into a sea of accusations, their voices overlapped, rising into a crescendo. "You were supposed to help us. You were supposed to care." The weight of their words pressed down on me like an avalanche. I fell to my knees, clutching my head, desperate to block out the noise. "Stop!" I shouted, my voice barely audible over the din. "I did what I could. I was only human." The ground beneath me cracked, and I fell through the darkness. When I landed, I was in a new space, vast, sterile, and eerily quiet. It resembled an operating room, but the walls were impossibly high, stretching into a void of shadow. In the center of the room was an operating table, and on it lay a patient, covered in a white sheet. My feet moved of their own accord, drawing me closer to the table. With trembling hands, I pulled back the sheet, only to recoil in horror. The patient was me. My own lifeless face stared back at me, pale and motionless. My chest was open, the heart exposed. But instead of beating, it was encased in a web of metallic wires and gears. The mechanisms were rusted and broken, their grinding echoing in the silence. "What is this?" I whispered, my voice hollow. "This is you," the voice from earlier replied, now softer, almost sorrowful. "A machine, devoid of feeling. You've neglected the very thing that makes you human." I turned, and there she was, Laura, or at least a version of her. She stood at the edge of the room, her figure glowing faintly. She wasn't wearing her usual scrubs, but a simple white gown, and her expression was one of both compassion and disappointment. "You think you're in control, Adrian," she said, stepping closer. "But control is an illusion. Life isn't a machine you can fix with a wrench and a scalpel. It's messy, it's unpredictable, and it requires something you've ignored for far too long." I swallowed hard, the weight of her words sinking in. What have I ignored? Humanity, she replied. Empathy, the ability to see beyond the physical and connect with the soul. I shook my head, backing away. I save lives. Isn't that enough? Is it? She countered, her gaze piercing. How many lives have you truly saved? And how many have you lost because you refused to see them as more than just cases? I had no answer. The truth was a gaping wound in my chest, raw and undeniable. Laura moved to the operating table, her hand hovering over the broken mechanisms of my heart. This isn't about your skill, Adrian. It's about your soul. And it's breaking. The room began to shift, the sterile walls dissolving into a swirling void. Laura's figure grew fainter, her voice echoing as she spoke her final words. You have a choice. Heal yourself or continue to break. But you can't fix others until you fix what's inside. Before I could respond, the void consumed me. I woke to silence. The chaos of the collapsing machinery was gone, replaced by a soft, golden glow that bathed the room in warmth. It took me a moment to realize where I was, or rather, where I wasn't. The endless void of gears and mechanisms was behind me, and I now stood in what appeared to be an impossibly vast, ethereal hospital ward. The walls shimmered faintly, their surfaces reflecting a strange combination of my memories and unfamiliar landscapes. It felt unreal, yet unsettlingly personal. In the center of the room, there was a single figure seated on a stool, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She wore a simple white gown that seemed to radiate light. Her face was calm, familiar, and unmistakable. It was Laura, the nurse from my hospital, the one I had always dismissed with a sharp word or an exasperated sigh. Laura, I whispered, though my voice echoed unnaturally in the stillness. She looked up at me with a mixture of kindness and disappointment, her eyes piercing in their clarity. You don't seem surprised to see me, she said, her voice soft but firm. I hesitated, unsure of how to respond. Was this real? Was she even real? I don't know what I'm seeing, I admitted. None of this makes sense. Laura smiled faintly, her expression tinged with sadness. You're right. None of it makes sense to you because you've spent your life rejecting what can't be measured or explained. I bristled at her words. I've spent my life saving lives. What more is there to understand? She rose from the stool and began to pace slowly around me, her movements graceful and deliberate. Saving lives? She repeated. Is that what you think you've been doing? Her question hit me harder than I expected, and I struggled to answer. Yes, I said defensively. I've saved hundreds, maybe thousands of people. I've dedicated everything to my work. And what have you sacrificed for it? She asked, stopping to face me directly. Empathy? Humanity? Do you even see the people you operate on as anything more than puzzles to solve? Her words stung, not because they were cruel, but because they were true. I wanted to argue, to defend myself, but the memories of my patients, the ones I'd dismissed, ignored, or forgotten, rose unbidden in my mind. Their faces blurred together, a haunting reminder of how distant I had become. I've done what I could, I said quietly, my voice trembling. I've done what was right. Laura's gaze softened. Adrian, doing what's right isn't the same as doing what's good. You've mastered the art of healing the body, but you've neglected the soul, both theirs and your own. I looked away, unable to meet her eyes. I'm not a spiritual man, I muttered. I've never believed in any of this. You don't have to, she replied gently. Belief isn't the point. Connection is. You've spent your life running from it, hiding behind your scalpel and your pride. But now, you have a choice. She gestured toward a mirror that had appeared on the far wall. Reluctantly, I walked toward it, each step feeling heavier than the last. When I reached it, I saw my reflection, not the confident, composed man I thought I was, but a broken version of myself. My chest was still open, my heart encased in rusted machinery, its gears grinding painfully with every beat. This is who you've become, Laura said, her voice almost a whisper. Man who's forgotten how to feel. But it's not too late to change. I turned to her, desperation in my voice. How? How do I change this? How do I fix what's broken? Her expression softened further, and she reached out to place a hand on my shoulder. You start by listening. To others, to yourself, to what lies beyond what you can see and touch. Healing isn't just about repairing what's broken. It's about understanding why it broke in the first place. I felt a wave of emotion rise within me. Guilt, regret, but also hope. And if I fail? I asked, my voice barely audible. Laura smiled, a glimmer of warmth in her eyes. Failure isn't the end, Aid. It's the beginning of growth. But only if you choose to learn from it. The golden glow around us began to fade, the room dissolving into shadow. Laura's figure grew faint, but her voice lingered, echoing in the void. You've been given another chance. Don't waste it. As the light disappeared completely, I found myself falling again, the ground vanishing beneath me. But this time, there was no fear. Only the faintest spark of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. When I woke up, my body felt like lead, weighed down by the remnants of a dream. Or was it something more? The faint beeping of a heart monitor brought me back to the present. My eyes fluttered open, adjusting to the sterile brightness of the hospital room. I wasn't in the OR anymore. Instead, I lay in a recovery bed, surrounded by the muffled hum of distant conversations and the quiet shuffle of feet. A nurse stood by my side, jotting notes on a clipboard. She noticed my movement and turned, her expression a mix of relief and professionalism. Dr. Royce, she said softly, welcome back. You gave us a scare. I tried to sit up, but a sharp pain shot through my chest, forcing me to lie back down. What happened? I asked, my voice hoarse. You collapsed in the operating room, she explained. The team stabilized you and performed emergency interventions. You're lucky to be alive. Alive. The word lingered in my mind, carrying an unexpected weight. Memories of the mechanical void, the figures of my patients, and Laura's words flooded back to me. I wanted to dismiss it all as a hallucination, the byproduct of stress and oxygen deprivation. But it felt too vivid, too real. As the nurse adjusted the IV line, she added, You'll need to take some time off to recover. The board has already reassigned your surgeries for the next month. I nodded absently, my thoughts elsewhere. Recovery. Time off. These were things I had always avoided, priding myself on my relentless work ethic. But now, the idea of stepping away felt necessary, not just for my body, but for my mind and soul. Over the next few days, I remained in the hospital, observing the world from a perspective I wasn't used to, that of a patient. I saw nurses moving with quiet compassion, doctors taking time to reassure families, and patients finding solace in small acts of kindness. It was a world I had been a part of, but had never truly seen. On the third day, Laura visited me. The real Laura, not the glowing figure from the void. She stood at the foot of my bed, her expression unreadable. How are you feeling? She asked, her voice tinged with genuine concern. Different, I admitted. And confused. She nodded, as if she understood more than I was saying. What happened in that OR wasn't just physical, was it? I hesitated, unsure of how to explain. I don't know what it was, but it felt like something broke open. Something I didn't even know was there. Laura's eyes softened. Maybe it's time to figure out what that something is. Her words stayed with me long after she left. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to sit with my thoughts. Not as a surgeon, but as a man who had come face to face with his own limitations. The spark of hope I had felt in the void began to grow, flickering like a fragile flame. Returning home should have brought comfort, but instead it brought unease. My apartment, once a sanctuary of order and efficiency, now felt cold and impersonal. The sterile white walls and meticulously arranged furniture seemed to mock me, reminding me of the mechanical perfection I had clung to for so long. I spent the first few days trying to fall back into my old routines. I read medical journals, reviewed patient files, and even drafted plans for new surgical but none of it felt the same. The voices from the void, The accusations, the questions, echoed in my mind, refusing to be silenced. One night, unable to sleep, I found myself staring at the reflection in my bathroom mirror. My face looked haggard, older than I remembered, and behind my tired eyes, I saw something else. The faint outline of the man I had become in the void, with a heart bound by rusted gears. I clenched the edges of the sink, frustration bubbling to the surface. "What do you want from me?" I whispered, as if the reflection could answer. But the silence that followed was deafening. The next morning, I returned to the hospital, not as a surgeon, but as an observer. I told the administration I wanted to shadow the ICU team, claiming it was part of my recovery process. In truth, I was searching for something I couldn't name. I watched Laura work with the patients, her presence a calming force in the chaos. She listened, truly listened, to their fears and hopes. She held their hands, whispered words of encouragement, and offered a faith I couldn't understand but couldn't dismiss. It was the opposite of everything I had been, a stark reminder of the humanity I had ignored. One patient in particular caught my attention, an elderly man with a failing heart. His family sat by his side, their hands clasped in prayer. The sight should have annoyed me, as it always had. Instead, I felt something stir within me, an ache, a longing. I approached the family hesitantly. "How is he doing?" I asked. The man's daughter looked up, her eyes red from crying. "He's holding on," she said, "but we don't know for how long." I glanced at the man, his frail chest rising and falling with labored breaths. For the first time, I didn't see a case or a challenge. I saw a person, a father, a husband, a life filled with stories I would never know. "Can I sit with him?" I asked, surprising even myself. The family nodded, stepping aside to give me space. I took the man's hand, its warmth grounding me in the moment. For a while, I said nothing, just sat there, feeling the weight of his life and the fragility of my own. When Laura passed by, she gave me a small smile, as if to say, "You're starting to understand." And maybe I was. But I also knew this was just the beginning. To truly change, I would have to make a choice, to let go of the man I had been and embrace the one I could become. The weeks that followed were unlike anything I had experienced before. Slowly but surely, I began to see my work and my life through a different lens. The man I had been, the surgeon obsessed with precision and control, was fading. In his place, someone else was emerging. A man who understood that healing wasn't just about fixing what was broken, but about acknowledging the whole person. It started with small changes. During patient rounds, I lingered longer at their bedsides, asking questions I'd never thought to ask before. "How are you feeling?" became more than a routine inquiry. I wanted to know how they were coping, what they feared, what gave them hope. And I listened, not just with my ears, but with my heart. The first real breakthrough came with the elderly man in the ICU, the one I had sat with during my recovery. He was too weak for surgery, and the prognosis was grim. His family clung to their prayers, and for the first time, I didn't dismiss their faith. Instead, I joined them, not in prayer, but in presence. I sat with them, shared stories, and even laughed. When the man finally passed, it was peaceful. His family thanked me, not for saving his life, but for helping them feel less alone. The experience shook me. For years, I had measured my success by lives saved and procedures perfected. Now, I realized that my role as a doctor was about more than that. It was about compassion, connection, and understanding. Word of my new approach spread quickly. Colleagues noticed the change, some with curiosity, others with skepticism. Laura, however, seemed quietly proud. "You're finding your way," she said one day after a particularly difficult case. "It's not easy, but it's worth it." I began to integrate these lessons into my practice, advocating for a more holistic approach to medicine. I worked with the hospital administration to establish a new program, one that combined traditional medical care with emotional and spiritual support. We brought in counselors, chaplains, and even meditation guides to help patients navigate the complexities of illness. It wasn't a cure-all, but it was a start. One of the most profound moments came during a seminar I was asked to lead for medical residents. I stood in front of the young, eager faces, remembering the arrogance I had once carried at their age. Medicine is a science, I told them, but it's also an art. Never forget that the person on your operating table has a life, a story, and a soul. Healing is about more than the body. It's about the heart. As I spoke, I saw Laura standing at the back of the room, her expression unreadable. But as our eyes met, she gave me the slightest nod. It was enough. It's been 6 months since the day I collapsed in the OR, and my life is unrecognizable from what it was before. I still perform surgeries, still hold lives in my hands, but I no longer see my work as simply a job. It's a calling, a chance to not only mend what's broken, but to bring comfort, understanding, and hope. I've come to terms with what happened during those moments of darkness, though I may never fully understand it. Was it a dream? A hallucination? Or something more? I've stopped trying to label it. All I know is that it changed me. Laura and I have grown closer in the months since. She's been my guide, my sounding board, and my friend. Through her, I've learned that faith isn't about having all the answers. It's about being willing to ask the questions. The hospital has changed too. The program we started is thriving, and I've seen firsthand how much it means to patients and their families. But the greatest change has been within me. The walls I built around myself, the armor of pride and detachment, are gone. In their place is something far more fragile but infinitely more valuable: humility. As I sit here, reflecting on everything, I think back to Laura's words in that otherworldly place. You have a choice. Heal yourself or continue to break. I chose healing. And though the path is long and often difficult, I'm walking it with an open heart. For the first time in years, I feel whole.